How many times have you thrown a great tee shot or put a good upshot close to the basket, but then you walk up, you're 5, 10 feet further away than you thought. Suddenly the basket looks really tiny, the putter feels all wrong in your hand, and you miss the putt. I've experienced this countless times. While I don't have all of the answers, I've put a lot of time and effort into improving my putting, and my putting has gotten better drastically. I'm not claiming to be anywhere close to the level of Isaac Robinson or Gannon Buhr, but I wanted to share a few things that helped me improve my putting and take me from struggling to take my first win in MA4 to taking down a win in MPO in just a couple of years. Just so you know, this is stuff that worked for me, but this isn't necessarily the best path to becoming the next Gannon Buhr. However, I found in my amateur tournaments very early on that I was beginning to putt better as a whole than almost everyone I was competing against. I can't possibly cover everything related to putting in one video, so if I'm leaving stuff out, please feel free to leave a comment and let me know what I missed. So one of the first things that I looked into when I was learning how to putt was the different styles of putting. So the main two that I looked at were push putting versus spin putting. The push putt style tends to get the power from a pop of the fingers as the disc leaves the hand. There's still some spin on the disc, it's not without spin, but the kind of power generated comes from the hand kind of opening up and popping the disc up and out, pushed forward. By contrast, the spin putt has its power generated from the wrist, spinning and snapping the disc forward toward the target. With a spin putt, you tend to have a flatter, straighter shot. You don't tend to have as much height variation. With a push putt, you tend to kind of pop the disc up into the air, sometimes with hyzer, sometimes nose down, but it kind of pops up and then drops down toward the basket, hopefully into the chains. I also did some research on how to grip the disc when putting. A lot of pros will say make sure that you hook your index finger underneath the rim of the disc. I think particularly for spin putting, this is very important because if your finger's on the outside, you don't only have a little less control, but you have your finger in the way. That's what Isaac Robinson says, is when you're getting the disc out of your hand, you have to move your finger out of the way so the disc can leave your hand. But if it's underneath, then your finger's not in the way. I personally think with the push putt style, getting that finger underneath is a little bit less essential. I think it can creep up a little bit, not too much on the side. You don't want it to be anywhere close to on top of the disc. But if it sneaks up a little bit from underneath, I think that's all right because the disc is popping up and out of your hand and that finger's not as much in the way as it is with that spin putt. So this is the staggered stance, often coming across to the left pocket of the left hip and then pushing forward, spinning it toward the basket. Then there's the straddle, where you place your feet perpendicular to the basket, and whatever grip you have, it normally comes down between the knees and forward to the chains. My style is staggered, but I kind of come down toward my right knee and then putt forward. There's a ton of variation with each of these forms. I'm not an expert or anything. If you want more details how to get better specifically at one certain type of putting, there are other videos out there that'll go more in depth. This is just kind of a bird's eye view of some of the general differences in form. Over time, I've come to see that a spin putt miss on average will leave me with a much longer comeback putt than an average miss with my push putting style. Even with rollaways, my push putting style tends to keep me a lot closer than the spin putt when I miss. For me, that's one big element of why I've stuck with my push putting style in Circle 1, because when I miss, I usually just tap in and move on. I'll also briefly mention that maybe you haven't picked out a putter for yourself yet. It's kind of tough because you don't really know if a putter is going to work for you until you try it out, but you don't want to buy 10 different putters just to try each one a couple of times. There are tons to choose from, and it's tough to say which one's going to work well for you. I recommend trying to find someone kind of like me, somebody who has a stack of discs at their house and maybe a few extra putters lying around that they're willing to let you borrow. I've got a stack of putters, some old, some new, all different from each other. If someone were to ask me to borrow a few putters, try them out, I would be happy to lend a few and help you find out what putter works best for you. Maybe you want a premium plastic putter. Maybe you want a putter that doesn't have a bead on the rim. Maybe you really like the beaded putter and like how that feels in your hand. I went to a clinic with Isaac Robinson and Alden Harris, and here's a little tidbit from Isaac about how people putt differently.
You look on Pro Tour and you see all of these different putting styles. Everybody has a different way that works for them, and that boils down to a lot of it has to do with hand size, body shape, and so it's not going to look like everybody else's. My putt is not going to look like Gannon's putt, and my putt doesn't look like Alden's putt, but everybody makes it work.
I have no idea what your experience is with putting, so if you're still trying to get everything figured out, then I recommend trying a beaded putter and a beadless putter, putting with different grips, putting with different stances, with a different style of release. Try to just see if there's something that feels a little more natural, something that's more comfortable. If so, lean into that and try it out. See if you can practice with it, get it figured out, and get it working for you. If you're pretty set in your putting style and you have more experience, I still recommend a little bit of experimentation because you never know what lie you're going to end up with. You can't pick your lie from the tee. And in a place like Charlotte, when you're playing in the woods, eventually you're going to start coming across a lie that's awkward, that's difficult, and it won't quite suit your putting style. You're going to have to adapt to that. You're going to have to switch putting styles or switch grips to try to make that putt work. I can't tell you how many times in tournament competition I found myself having to make an adjustment to my style just to try to get an angle to run a putt at the basket. So once you've picked out your putter, you figured out your form and your stance, for the most part you know how you're going to putt. It's time to switch away from experimenting to practicing. So one of the big things for practice is you're going to want multiple putters. I started out with just one putter and practicing with only one Warden, and it can be done. You can improve, but man, is it tough. Boy, does it get old, making or missing one putt, walking up, grabbing it, walking back, putting again. I mean, to get 100 putts, you've got to walk up and get your putt 100 times. Now I have a dozen Warden primes of the same weight, and putting 100 times is much easier. It's less than 10 sets of putting, and I've got myself 100 putts. Yes, it can get a little bit costly to stack up a bunch of putters, but I putt with the base plastic, the Warden primes. It's about $13 a putter, and I play a lot of tournaments, and I'm finding that I'm getting tournament credit and vouchers. I've been using those vouchers to get myself extra Wardens and add them to my practice stack. I highly recommend at least having 3 putters to practice with. It'll save you a lot of time if you have multiple putters, and the more the better. I think that having 10 putters really gets you to that next level of being able to putt over and over again before you have to go and collect all of your putts. I got by with 3 for a long time. 3 is kind of the minimum that you're going to want to have to putt with, because at least you'll have a few putts before you have to go up and collect them again. I don't think that experimenting goes out the window when you shift your focus to practice, but I would say maybe only 5 to 10% of the time do you want to be trying new things and kind of goofing off. You want to keep 90% focused on practice. So you've probably heard this before. It's likely on every putting video out there. But aim small, miss small is true. It is helpful. I grew up bow hunting and target shooting, and I would aim at the very center of the bullseye, and I would miss all the time. But usually, I only missed by so much. So a lot of my misses were only a few inches off of the center. I found the same principle to hold true with putting and disc golf. If you're aiming at a single chain, you're probably going to miss that chain a lot. But if you're aiming small and you miss by a little bit, you're probably making almost all of those putts that only miss by a few inches. So I recommend honing in, aiming at one specific chain, one specific point, and acknowledge that you're not going to hit that chain every single time. But you're going to start making more and more putts that miss by a little bit. If it helps, you can even tape up a chain or buy one of those disc dots so that it's easier to see your aim point and orient yourself away from the basket, putting at that specific spot. When you do miss, pay attention to what that miss is. If you're missing 6 inches right almost every single time, then just pick a chain over to the left and aim at that instead. If you're missing high or low, you can adjust your aim point to account for that miss and see if more of your putts start to go in. Here's another thing that really helped me. I got super familiar with Circle 1. I measured out to 10 meters, or 32.8 feet in freedom units, and I marked out 15 feet, 20, 25, etc. You might want to stick at a certain distance for a while and putt there until you become very familiar with it, or you can bounce around a little bit and get experience in all parts of the circle. Either way, I think having a rough measurement of how far your putt is just helpful for becoming familiar with how a putt at a certain distance feels. For me, I do a lot of putting from 25 feet, so when I step up to a 29-foot putt in my round, I get the sense that I'm a little bit past 25 and I might need to give it just a tiny bit of extra power to get there. Measuring out the circle and getting familiar with it will also help you know if you're inside or outside circle 1 and if you have the ability to step putt or jump putt. But outside the circle putting is going to be the topic of a completely different video. Another fundamental principle in disc golf to putting well and practicing well is to practice making putts. This is something that Johnny McRae says, and I got a lesson from him, and he signed my putter. It's very faded now because I had him sign a base plastic Keystone, but he wrote with his signature, "Practice making putts." I think that it's important, both physically and mentally, to practice putts that you're going to make most of the time. Isaac Robinson said something similar in his Latitude 64 putting video. He said that he likes to put most of his time practicing where he's going to make 85 to 90% of his putts. And I think for him, it's like 30 some feet. For me, I want at least half of my putting practice to be a putt that I should make most of the time. So personally, that's within 30 feet. Any open putt within 30 feet, I should make more often than I miss. My Circle 1 putting percentage is well above 50%, somewhere around that 70% range. So often what I'll do is I'll go to 25 feet and I'll putt 100 times. I'll see how many I make out of 100. That's easy to find my putting percentage that way. And then I'll do it again and I'll compare, and then I'll do it again. And then over time, as weeks pass, I want to be seeing that putting percentage slowly climbing and pushing somewhere around 80%. While I think that it is essential to practice making putts, I do like to split my putting practice and push myself to grow in my putting at further distances. So I will put a chunk of my putting practice outside 30 feet, getting used to running longer putts, making some of them, and getting a little more familiar with what it feels like to run and make some of those long putts. I think that it is valuable to try longer putts. I think it does push you to putt from further. I even heard back from one of you guys, a viewer, who because of my description of how I run long jump putts, decided to start putting from further and further away. He went out and he started running 70-foot putts more often, and suddenly he found that he started making a lot of closer putts in Circle 2. I think it's well worth your time to put some effort into stretching yourself and attempting longer and more difficult putts, but not at the expense of practicing making putts. I think it is essential and fundamental to spend at least half of your time practicing a putt that you should make most of the time, getting familiar with what it's like to make your putts so that mentally, emotionally, physically, you're used to making putts. I also suggest that you be very intentional with your putting practice. Pay attention to when you miss, what happened with your fingers, with your hand, with your swing, with your feet when you missed. Did you miss right, left, high, or low? Did you miss a couple times in a row? Was it one side then the other? Sometimes your form might be good and you miss once and then you try to adjust based off that and start missing the other way. Sometimes something's off with your form and you need to fix it. It's hard to figure all of that out, but the more that you pay attention and try to understand what's going on with your body and your putters, the more you can learn about yourself and improve your putting. For me, with my push putt style, I tend to miss low when I miss. Now that's fine in a way because I hit the cage and just drop straight down, but at the same time, I want to be aware of that. When I'm running a little bit of a longer putt, I need to be aware, am I giving this enough power to make it over the basket? Maybe you're like me and you tend to miss low, or right, or left, or high. Maybe you're like Gannon Burr and your miss is 93 miles per hour to the dead center of the basket and it just pops back out. But either way, the more that you pay attention and understand how you putt and how you make mistakes and mess up, you can begin to fix it, balance it, learn, and grow as a putter. One thing that I like to do when I'm practicing, and it helps if you have more putters that you're practicing with, is when I do miss putts, I like to go to my comebacker putt and try to make it from there. If I'm missing my first putt and missing a lot of my comebackers, I maybe shouldn't be running that putt from that distance or that angle or whatever's going on. If it's a tricky putt and a miss means that you're probably missing that putt coming back, it might be worth it to just lay up. As much as some people like to act like we should run every putt, sometimes it's more strategic for your score to just lay up a putt, take your par or your single bogey, whatever it is, and move on to the next hole. Some people also like to create internal pressure when they're just practicing. They'll think this putt is to win my tournament, or even like this is to win worlds or something like that. Putting that pressure on themselves can sometimes create a better sense of focus so that you're thinking, this putt really matters. I'm going to give it everything that I have to try to make it. This can be good because sometimes when you're casually putting and you're not really focusing on trying to make every putt, you can be practicing poorly. We want to practice well so that we build and grow our putting to the next level. Putting this internal pressure on yourself might be very helpful in focusing on making every putt and making the most of your practice. For alternative forms of internal pressure, you can always just eat Taco Bell before your practice session. That will be motivating. I personally think that putting practice is fun all on its own, but not everyone feels the same way. I have a music playlist titled Putting Practice with 45 songs in it. They're all upbeat, energetic, and enjoyable songs that I really like. They motivate me and keep me focused on my putting practice. Maybe you're really into the statistics and you want to record your putting percentage from each distance and compare it week to week and see the trends in your putting, hopefully improving over time and raising your putting percentage at all distances. There are tons of drills that you can run as well to keep yourself motivated when you're practicing. Some people like taking a step backwards every time they make a putt and then stepping forward again whenever they miss one. There are tons of drills out there that people have come up with for their putting practice, and you can make some of your own too. Some people like taking a step back every time they make a putt, and when they miss one, stepping forward again. So one of my favorite practice drills to do, and you can change the distance to whatever you want and however many makes and misses, but I'll go to about 15 feet and I'll putt 5 times. Once I make 5 out of 5 from 15, I'll move back to 20 feet and have to make all 5 from 20 feet. Then maybe I'll move to 25 and I need to make 4 out of 5. Then I'll move to 30 feet and I need to make 3 out of 5, so 60%. I find that this drill is really helpful for me because A, I'm practicing making putts. I'm keeping my percentage high, well above 50%, making everything basically at 15 and 20 feet, and then still making most of my putts at 25. But when we do move out toward 30 feet, we start to miss more putts. So we go from making almost all of them to making and missing maybe close to the same amount, something around 50-50. At that point, I'm pushing, I'm stretching myself to grow into putting better at 30 feet. But I'm still spending a lot of time making putts from closer up. Oftentimes, I'll count how many times I failed to make a set of putts. Maybe I failed once at 20 feet and twice at 30 feet. So 3 fails. Then I'll run through the drill again and try to have 2 or 1 or no fails. I've found that this is a helpful way to give a little more variety, but also a lot of repetition in my putting, getting very comfortable at several different distances. At the same time, I'm moving away from the putts that I make every single time and shifting toward a distance where I'm making almost all of them. There are tons of things that you can do, a lot of ways to keep yourself interested and engaged with your putting practice. You can putt with a friend and play games like horse or the putting game. You can just take 2 putters with you when you're out on the course and putt twice or 4 times from every lie that you have, just to get in a little more of that repetition while you're still playing a full round. Maybe you want to do something like at the very end of your putting session, you go out to 40 feet and putt until you make it once. Then the next day, you putt from 41 feet until you make it, until you start pushing out to running a really long putt. I can't cover every type of putting variety and drill, so there's a ton out there that I'm not even gonna be able to talk about. But let me know in the comments what you guys do to practice your putting that you found to be effective. So for me, when it comes to putting practice, it's all about improvement. It's about getting better, not about getting perfect. In the 2024 Pro Tour season, for all players who played more than just a couple of events, there were 0 players with a 100% Circle 1 putting stat. In fact, only 4 players were over 90% in Circle 1. One of the best things that helps me when I'm putting in a tournament is thinking the thought, I make this putt a lot. It's a confidence booster because I remember the countless times that I've made the putt, and I remember that my putting percentage from that distance is pretty high, At the same time, I know better than to think that I make that putt 100% of the time. I know that eventually I'm going to miss that putt at some point, so when it happens, I realize that my putting statistics are still pretty good, and some misses have to and will happen. But it's not a big deal. This thought takes a ton of pressure off the putt, because I know that I can be confident in my putt, but eventually, at some point, I'm going to miss. And when that happens, I can move on from it. But next time I have that putt, I'm probably going to make it, because I make that putt a lot. It stinks to miss a putt, but I think we all need to recognize the reality that at some point we're going to miss a putt that we should make. For some people, missing just a couple of putts can really unlock a downward spiral and tank what was potentially a pretty good round of golf. Recognizing that you're not going to make every single putt in the circle for the rest of your life can really set you free to miss a putt once in a while and move on to the next hole without it really wearing on you. When you put in the repetition, practicing making putts, your body and your mind will become very familiar with what it's like to make that putt. You won't be perfect, but you can be a whole lot better. And when you've put in the work on the practice green, it will pay off in confidence on the course. Getting focused on the putt in front of you is also huge. I know some people who like to walk up to their lie and putt right away. For them, it takes away some of the nerves, it takes away the second guessing, the wondering if I'm doing this right, and it frees them to just putt at the basket. For some people, it might help to walk up and putt right away. But for me, I find that taking a few seconds to focus is extremely helpful in helping me make that putt. I have a brief checklist that I like to run through before I take my putt. Each item on this list takes 2 or 3 seconds, so I'm not advocating for standing in your lie for 45 seconds until you happen to feel right. But this checklist for me gets me into the mindset of knowing I can make this putt, and I'm going to do my best to putt the right way and see if I can make it. So first, I like to take just a couple seconds to set my feet the right way. The way that I practice my putting, I want to get my feet into the correct spots. So I don't like to assume that my feet are set correctly based on muscle memory. So I like to take 2 or 3 seconds to just look down, focus on my foot placement, get them placed correctly, and then move on. Step 2 is to get the putter comfortable in the hand. I've seen some people who will just spin the putter around and around in their hand, trying to get it to feel comfortable. For me, as long as the putter is clean and dry, you're able to just set your grip like normal and hold your putter the same way every time. For no reason, I like to hold it with a stamp upside down, facing visually away from me, with my thumb on the right side. When I take a couple seconds to set my grip, I'm able to forget about it and focus on the task at hand, which is making that putt. The next step in my checklist is to look around past the basket to see if there's anything that's a visual distraction. Maybe a flag is flying or somebody's walking a dog down the sidewalk. I find that if I don't notice those distractions, then when I'm in the motion of my putt, sometimes I'll notice it at the last second, and that messes me up. But if I see the distraction ahead of time, I'm able to acknowledge it and ignore it and get my attention focused on the basket. The last part of the checklist is to putt like I do in practice. When I've got my putter in the hand and I'm trying to make my putt, the time for thinking is pretty much over. I want to think in practice, but when I'm about to make the putt, I want to turn off the brain and putt like normal. So I pick a chain and do my best to hit it. I really hope this has been helpful. Maybe it's inspired you to get in a little bit more putting practice this week. I'll leave you with one final personal experience of mine. Leading up to the 2024 Chain Hawk Open in December last year, I really wanted to win an MA1. In the 5 days leading up to the Chain Hawk Open, I putted over 1,500 times to prepare for the Chain Hawk Open. Several hundred of those putts were in the complete dark, and over half of them, it was below 45 degrees, and in Florida, that's cold. But in the Chain Hawk Open, the MA1 division competed earlier in the morning. So for the majority of the competitive time in the tournament for MA1, it was below 50 degrees. I ended up only missing 2 Circle 1 putts over 3 rounds of the Chain Hawk Open, and I took home the win. The putting practice absolutely pays off. Tell me in the comments if you're going to try out any of the putting tips that I brought up in this video, and let me know if I missed something that really works for you and might help other people. I didn't even come close to covering everything when it comes to putting, so I know that there's a ton more that could be said. If you've got more questions for me and you want to chat and have the chance for me to give more full answers to what you're asking, then join our live stream every 6:30 p.m. EST on Sundays. If you wanted to see some of my putting in an actual tournament with real pressure, then check out the Chainhawk Open videos that I have on my channel. Also, if you didn't see it, I'm doing a 3-disc giveaway, so check out that video, leave a comment, and get yourself entered for a chance to win one of these sweet discs. I mean, especially this sapphire. Wow. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope this video helped, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.